Big day here on the BWI Live Recruiting Show. They've all been big recently, but this is the last one. How you close the door on official visit season here in June. We're going to find out what's coming up for the Nittany Lions on Friday through Sunday morning-ish with our experts, Sean Fitz and Ryan Snyder, the leading industry insiders in Penn State recruiting. This is the place you come for that information. The place that you go for it full-time is BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We're going to be talking about the topics that are on the mind of these gentlemen throughout the show. Some great conversation in the chat to start already. But Ryan, first things first, you're at the beach. What are you doing here?
Sean guilt-tripped me into it. I think that's the best way to...
Whoa. Oh, I told you. I'm going next. And I kind of need this one next week, so I didn't expect you. So just found out about 15 minutes ago we'd be joined by Ryan. Actually told him we were going to drag him the entire show. So that's why he came on, just so we, had to say it to his face, I guess.
Sean has done one podcast from the beach before. This is my second, or this is my first. We're even now. We'll discuss it next week.
Well, when your mother-in-law walks in just mid-sentence, during their live broadcast, then we're even. So.
Oh, it's gonna be my kids. But
or someone bounces a ping pong ball in the background. Fits. Yeah, I appreciate the dedication from these two gentlemen to be doing this show on vacation. And Ryan, I wasn't expecting you today. I'm super excited to have you here, and I'm glad you're here. But what I was going to talk about to start the show, Fitz and I both have done a little bit of more digging on Jahmir Joseph, Penn State's latest commitment in the class of 2025. The cornerback, we already talked about him out of New Jersey, who is Penn State's top player on the board. You did a deep dive on him, Fitz, and then I did some film study on him yesterday. So what did you write about? What did you learn about Jahmir Joseph when you were doing that deep dive on him as a commit?
Yeah, a lot of the things that we said in his post-commitment video the other night. It was he's more of a mirror corner, not so much physical at the line of scrimmage. But it's interesting when you say that, and then you look at his tape. He's pretty physical when he finishes plays in terms of tackling. We mentioned Notre Dame liked him as a safety. I could see that. He's got a lot to like back there. I know you broke down the Quincy Porter matchup, which is just one of the heavyweight fights in North Jersey last year. So definitely check that out if you're on the Blue White Illustrated message board. But yeah, man, Joseph, really good player. Some of the things that popped up when you were watching that has kind of resonated with what we had to say after he committed. Essentially, it's like we're not sure how fast he is. We think he's fast enough. But again, a John Mitchell situation from last year. We think he's really good, just not sure how fast he is. John Mitchell came in, ran a 4.5. I think he was in the 4.4s in the spring. So you've got the same type of athlete, good length. I wouldn't call it exceptional length. I heard you say on the show the other day you thought maybe 33. I don't think he's a 33-inch arm guy, okay. But I think he's got functional length. He's got a as you just saw on the YouTube, he's got a big catch radius. He's able to knock balls away, and he's got I like that he's got a good instinct. And this is just from some of the game tape, some of the highlights, but not all DBs know when a knockdown is good enough, like when it's a great play. And some will go for the interception, and some, will get hung up and get flagged because of it, and just get a little bit too close. I think Joseph, what he shows is that there's an instinct there of like, hey, a knockdown is good enough. It's great. So I like that about him. He seems to have a good feel for the defense that they're running, and I'm sure he'll have that at the next level. So again, Jahmir Joseph's been one of my favorites for a long time, and outside of the data that we don't have on him in terms of athleticism, like I feel pretty good about that one.
Yeah, if you want to, as Fitz mentioned, go to the Blue White Illustrated message board. I broke down. I'm doing scouting for the film room anyway, but I found his game against Bergen Catholic wide receiver and now Ohio State commit Quincy Porter Jr. In a massive battle. I mean, it turned into a one-on-one at a camp between these two guys because during the second and third quarter, all they did was throw to Quincy Porter and just go at him. So there was a lot of information to gain. I thought it was a great fight between the two. You want to get some of the details. You want to get the analysis of maybe who won that matchup if you haven't seen it for yourself already. The link to the video so you can go watch it yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go and see. Maybe you have a different opinion of all that stuff, but it's on the Blue White Illustrated message board. And this is just a shameless plug. as we always do, to tell you to subscribe to Blue White Illustrated 2 months for $1. This is just one of the things you get. You get Fitz's recap of Jahmir Joseph, what he likes about him, what I find in those film rooms, code PSU1, the stuff you get on the message board. You don't get the full context in the articles sometimes, so it's 2 months for $1 for you to subscribe right now to Blue White Illustrated, and you get 2 months of that information, 2 months of that content. We'd be super happy and excited to have you over at the message board. We've got a bunch of people here on the show, by the way, who have converted from being just people here on the show to being message board members and subscribers to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So it is something that has been done, and you absolutely can do. We're excited to have you join us on the show. And we're excited to have our sponsor here. That is My Perfect Franchise. Ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream? Maybe you want to have a side hustle while you're working your current job. That way you can double dip, make extra money, set yourself up for the future. So maybe you can leave that current job, right? All those ideas, all those things people do all the time. It's all about your future, maybe building wealth or a legacy. My Perfect Franchise, Andy Ludicky is a franchise consultant placing you in a business to run where you can be your own boss and make your own money. Your expertise going to your bank account. Whether things are booming in the economy or there's a downturn, it doesn't matter. There's always a business. There's always a sector that's moving, and Andy's got his pulse on that. He also isn't just trying to throw you into any business. He's trying to find the right one for you to manage. And you can find out what that is based on your skills and experience in corporate leadership. Maybe you have technical expertise. Call him at 404-973-9901. Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. Also, the link to his website is in the show notes of all the videos here on the Recruiting Show that he is a sponsor of, so you can check him out there, or on the Blue White Illustrated message board. Another reason to go there and to be a subscriber, because now he's running contests. If you can guess the business that he's presenting to you, you'll get a 3-month subscription to Blue White Illustrated. You'll get a 3-month comp. So make sure you check him out, Andy at myperfectfranchise.net, to talk to him about all of that great stuff. So now, let's get into something that happened last night. Penn State football landed a commitment yesterday, and as you can see, our experts have been out living their lives. Ryan is at the beach. Fitz was out and about yesterday. So here we are, maybe a day later, but still giving you the information you seek, giving you the knowledge on the latest commitment. So Fitz, I'm going to come to you to start this off. Who did Penn State get yesterday, picking him up out of the pool of uncommitted players left here in June?
Yes, on Wednesday evening, Penn State added another player in the secondary, about 8 p.m., Antonio Branch, safety from South Florida. He's listed as a corner by On3, but I think he projects as a safety. If you look at his tape, he plays a lot of safety. 4-star, like right on the edge of a 4-star there in the On3 industry rankings, number 400 overall, number 36 corner, number 55 in Florida. On3 has him a little bit lower, as 88, 3-star. Number 54 corner, number 61 in Florida. So this is a guy that came up, and all credit to Ryan on this one in terms of like sniffing this one out. He was coming up for the first weekend of official visits, and Ryan was it was like digging around there that week, and he had his inside lash. He's like, hey, don't be surprised, Antonio Branch. This is a guy that's been very high on Penn State. He hasn't visited a ton of schools, but he wanted to get out and see some more schools this month, and I think he was close to committing before he stepped foot on campus. Like, Ryan, would you agree with that?
Yeah, it was right there. I mean, pretty much the way it was explained to me, he pretty much just held off because mom and dad were saying, hey, you got to visit in 3 weeks. Like, let's maybe not rush into this. But, during the May-April contact period, I believe Penn State, I'm not sure which coaches specifically were down there, but I know they had a really good meeting. Of course, they can meet with 2025 guys now. That's a new rule change this year. And really, I don't know, maybe about a week after that, we started getting word that he was seriously considering a commitment at that time. And, as things went on, of course, mom and dad wanted to make sure, let's go see the school first, because he had never visited Penn State. That's kind of important, right? So can't blame parents for that mindset there. But yeah, I mean, as soon as he got on campus, I mean, I thought there was a real chance he would probably commit right after or shortly after, we'll say. He ended up waiting a little bit longer. He didn't take that Florida visit. Did he take another official visit, Sean? He was supposed to go to Louisville. Do you know if he went anywhere else?
He was supposed to go to Louisville this weekend. Yeah, he was supposed to go to Louisville this weekend. He was supposed to go to Florida last weekend. Didn't go to Florida. So like he kind of not completely shut it down, but I don't want to say he's been on board for a while, but like he's been giving intentions that are like professing his intentions that he was going to go to Penn State for a while. He went to Nebraska in the spring, so he had an official visit, right. But like we're so like locked into June that we don't really think about the April official visits. Again, it still has got on his profile. He's going to Louisville this weekend. I don't expect that trip to happen. Of course, familiar with Miami and some of those schools, which I think will keep an eye on him throughout the season. It's tough to overlook a Booker T. Washington kid, especially if you're Miami, because they're in it every year. So that's kind of what we're looking at with Antonio Branch. Felt good going into the visit, felt better coming out of the visit, and then I hit up some people earlier this week, and they expected him to announce next week after his Louisville visit. Didn't make it to that. I put in a pick for him at the beginning of the week. If you're on Blue White, you knew this one was coming. So another step in that secondary book. So it's a good pickup in the sense I think he's got a lot of potential. I think he's still rail thin. 6'2" is just about right. 6'1.5", 6'2", 175, really good length. Guy that's going to have maybe that. I don't want to put him on the Zakee Wheatley path, but like I think the best bet with him is to start him at corner and then maybe roll back and he's interesting and eventually change him to safety. Here's my thought on that, T. Frank. Like if you're not so Vabu Torre is a safety all the way. Dejan safety all the way. But if you're not that guy that's going to play right away, like why wouldn't you put him at corner like you did with Wheatley, like you did with a couple other guys? KJ Winston, I think, started at corner, just doing some things that they needed him to do to learn coverage, because eventually when you're going to play in that 3 safety role, you're going to be playing slot corner, you're going to be playing nickel or whatever it's going to be. So I think that the best bet there for Branch would be to maybe make him a corner, and then after his first season, because I don't think he's an immediate impact guy, after his first season, switch him over and play him in his future position.
They did the same with Lamont Payne, by the way, too.
That's
right.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. We'll show you the highlight film. I do want to ask one thing, because this is a situation where the data says one thing in terms of where he ranks as an athlete in the On3 industry rankings. I think there is some difference between the position he'll play and honestly the position he plays in high school. He plays safety in high school, but he's ranked as a corner. So maybe some of the things you just mentioned, Fitz. But when you look at Anthony Poindexter's track record, 3-star guy, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of room and potential for growth here. Fitz, or sorry, Ryan, I want to come to you with this one. Just you've talked to Poindexter about this multiple times. The size, the length, all those things seem to be there. So the building blocks of an athlete to be maybe outplay his current ranking, they all seem to be there, especially if a guy like Poindexter wants him. Is that fair?
I think it was ranking. I mean, we're just missing a lot of information, right? I mean, so how many of those top guys, Sean, do we have information on? I think that's a big part of it.
Yes, T. Frank asked this question a couple weeks ago. It's like, hey, we don't have a ton of information on some of these top guys that Penn State's going after. Well, if you think about it, when they're a top guy, they kind of, I don't want to say shy away from camps, but you don't go to as many camps, you don't get as many numbers and things like that. And then there's other guys that just kind of stay away from that because they don't want to test. Because if you test and you test poorly, there's ramifications there. So and this is a completely side conversation, not to go with Antonio Branch, but we don't have those numbers, but we do have the size numbers, we do have the length numbers. It's interesting that Dex likes big safeties. He doesn't look like a big safety because he's 6'2", because he's 175 right now, but he's 6'2", like he's close to 6'2", and he's going to fill out and eventually be a guy that fits into that room in terms of height. So curious to see, like, this is a kid that's going to blow up in a college weight program. He's going to be probably 190 by the time he gets to campus, and then probably over 200 pounds as a redshirt freshman. So I don't have concerns about like filling out nutrition, all that kind of stuff at a place like Penn State. Now, concerns I have, he does he plays safety. There's a little corner tackling in there. Like he's a drop to the ground and grab him type guy. I don't think that's a hip drop tackle, but I still don't know what a hip drop tackle actually is. So it's a situation where you're curious about the physicality as compared to some of the guys that Dex has brought in.
Yeah,
like a Torre. Dejan Lane was interesting because I felt like I had a similar criticism about him after watching a full game. But I mean, I think you kind of have that. But Dejan Lane is faster, bigger, and I mean he's a guy I'm curious to see if he's going to play as a freshman. So, but Branch gives you some coverage skills. Of course, he plays in Florida, which is a double-edged sword in terms of like he plays some great competition, but he also is in South Florida. So Penn State's going to have to keep an eye on him because that's just how the world works these days. So we'll see what happens with Antonio Branch. I think it's a guy that a lot of people in that building like. The safety class with Kainoa Winston and Jayon Blair leading the charge in terms of top targets is changing. Like the landscape of that is changing. Of course, Winston committed to Michigan. Blair, I would still say, is a Notre Dame lean. He's got a big official visit this weekend, but you're seeing names pop up like Branch, like Braswell Thomas, who's going to be on campus this weekend. So the landscape of that safety position has changed a little bit.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say, and I'm just echoing what you said earlier, Fitz, is when you watch his film, it is obvious this is a guy who's underpowered when he runs. The movement skills look good, but it just looks like it's happening in slow motion. So putting that weight on will make him faster and more explosive. And where he doesn't really jump off the tape to you from an athletic standpoint, all the building blocks are there, and you just think if you just put a couple more RPMs, you put a little more horsepower under the hood, and this is a guy who then pops off the film a little better because at 175, you're right, he looks super skinny. The other thing I've mentioned, and I want to see more of him in his full game film, is he plays tight end a lot. He lines up as a tight end. So does he block? What is his physicality? What is his strength at this size look like as a blocker? I'm not looking for pancakes. I'm just looking for, hey, is there something more there than we're seeing? Because a lot of that stuff is receptions. And then on the other side, he plays in a pretty sophisticated high school defense. So he's got an understanding of off coverage, off man coverage, some quarters elements, and the ability to, as you saw there, I think that's the biggest thing for Poindexter is being able to explode and close on the ball in underneath, rally to the football. I think he's a willing tackler, but you're right. The tackling technique needs to get better, where he needs to not be diving at ankles and wrapping up a little bit more. That one's obvious from his highlight film. So I like the potential. This class is all about betting on the upside of these athletes, where you've got players that are 3 stars. Maybe they're a tight end that they're going to play tackle later. Ryan, I know I've talked to you a lot about this in terms of this particular class, but now that we're getting a full sense of what it is, now that we zoom out from Antonio Branch to the secondary and then the class at large, what are your opinions? What are your feelings of it now that we've got we're getting close to 20 commits in this class now, right?
It's 16, I believe is what is the number now.
Rounding up.
Yeah, 2 more defensive backs, I would think, is the goal. Certainly another safety, I think, is certainly high on Poindexter's list. Look, if they can get Brandon Finney, they're going to add Brandon Finney. Outside of him, I'm not sure exactly where they go at corner, but we'll get. I think we'll get into it a little bit more when we look at the guys who are visiting this weekend. But a lot of the offensive positions. I mean, tight end, obviously they add Oish, but like for the most part, even if they miss on him, I think they're happy with Matt. Obviously, they're happy at running back, happy at quarterback. They would love to add another offensive tackle, and of course, wide receiver has to be sorted out. But to me, it's all about getting defensive line sorted out. And really wide receiver. I think those are the 2 things that once those dominoes start falling, you'll see this class at 20, 22 commits pretty quick.
So if you want more of that, check out bluewhiteillustrated.com. As always, please like and subscribe here on the YouTube channel. We appreciate everyone being here as we discuss Antonio Branch. We'll be back with more of these breaking news and commitment videos when all of that happens. And of course, you can check out our Blue White Illustrated live show. That is Tuesday through Thursday here on the YouTube channel. Let's get into our next section of conversation, and we're going to get into the chat here in a second. There's a ton of stuff in there. We had a lot to get through. This is, as always, the recruiting show is a nutrient-dense show, so we're going to get to your thoughts and some of your comments here in the in this portion of the show. But Penn State, its official visits last week, they were more selective with the committed players coming to campus and being their celebration sort of weekend, but there were some critical targets on campus as well. You see his face there to start. Andrew Oish, the 4-star tight end, one of the top players left in Pennsylvania. Fitz, the question was, where's the feedback on Andrew Oish? Everyone was dying for that information. Yesterday, you wrote about some of that stuff. Go to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for the whole thing, but what can you tell us here about what is the status with Andrew Oish?
Yeah, Oish is out in California right now for the Elite 11 All-22. He spoke to Steve Wiltfong out there about his Penn State visit, about what he's trying to do. So Ryan wrote that up this morning, so definitely check that out. Michigan's still very prevalent in this one. He's going to visit Michigan. And you look at the 3 uncommitted guys. Jahmir Joseph, of course, committed to Penn State. The 3 uncommitted guys have visits at the end of June this weekend. This is the last visit weekend of June, by the way. The dead period will start on Monday. And big visits for all 3 of these guys. Andrew Oish is going to Michigan. Randy Adarica is going to Miami, defensive lineman from South Florida. And then Taz Williams is also going to Michigan. So this is a pivotal weekend for those 3 uncommitted official visitors. Tough to bet against the last opportunity for all these guys. Like Michigan, we thought was strong with Oish coming in. Just the feedback that we've gotten leads me to believe that's not a done deal. But at the same time, I think Michigan would be the clubhouse leader at this point. It's very interesting because everybody was waiting for feedback. He's not a good interview. And that's not an insult. He doesn't say a lot in terms of how he's handled this whole thing. So to take what he said in our interview this morning, there's still some openness there. Ryan and I were poking around on this visit, and it seems like, yes, Michigan is prevalent here, but Penn State also still in it. The football aspect of it, Penn State's got, I would say, the best package in terms of football. Like in terms of like, you're a tight end, you're an in-state guy. Penn State has played tight ends early. I know that's a priority for him. But like, that's kind of where you're at with that. But I still think Alabama might still be in it. Florida, for all the issues that they've had, does offer early playing time, and that's a big thing for him. And he told me that a couple of weeks ago at the Elite 11. So I think that's very I don't think this is done to Michigan. If I had to pick today, I think it'd be Michigan, but I don't think it's done to Michigan.
Ryan, what's your read on the situation?
He's consistently mentioned early playing time, and I think that's where Sean and I had the most hesitation, right? Just because you look at Penn State's board, obviously, they've added some really good players over the last couple of years, and have a few guys right now who are going to contribute a lot in the next year or two. When I also look at Michigan, though, man, they have like 10 tight ends on their roster. Now I'm sure a couple of them are walk-ons. Like Colston Loveland is the only one who's really proven anything. But they just added Hogan Hansen, who was a top target for Penn State last year. Brady Prescored, who was maybe at one point Tide's top target. Yeah, so they have some young depth there too, and that's where it's like, if playing, getting on the field maybe in the first year or two is the most important thing, like Florida is kind of the safe bet there. But I'm not going to bet against Alabama. I'm not going to bet against Michigan, who many people work on getting those vibes. What you're saying? Right. So it'll be interesting, man. I think Penn State has a chance, but I'm not. You asked me this 3 months ago. I thought a lot better than how I do now, and time will really tell. And sending them to Michigan, though, to get that last visit, I do think that's key.
One thing that was interesting when I talked to him at Elite 11 is he mentioned the differing styles of the tight ends that were at Alabama and at Michigan, and he didn't see that at Penn State. So like he told me that, hey, Alabama's tight ends are 260. Like, I'm not 260. I'm more of a receiver, and I think that's been sold to him at Michigan as well. Penn State's interesting because you've got Luke Reynolds, who is a similar, like, if we're just going to look at build, if we're going to create a player here, like they're pretty similar in that. You've got Matt Henderson in this class, and I don't think that factors in here, but you've got Matt Henderson, and they're all in that mold of, as a junior, this kid was probably 195 pounds, 200 pounds, and they're going to build it up around the athleticism. Oish is an exceptional athlete, and he showed it at Elite 11. Like, he's got really good hands. He's got really good receiver tools to work with.
Yep.
But then I look at this and I'm like, Penn State has played guys fairly early, and it might not be like as a true freshman because of the room being stacked, but Andrew Rappleyea is going to play, if not starters, reps, like a lot of reps this year as a redshirt freshman. You go back, Khalil Dinkins actually played pretty early. Tyler Warren played earlier than we thought he was going to play. So like the whole Penn State's room is stacked, so there's not early playing time there, is kind of sleight of hand, I would say. So that's just my interesting sort of outsider perspective on that, in terms of like you can hear what's being told to him from other sides, and it's very interesting to see that. And like I said with Jeff Exenor a couple of weeks ago, like you hear, and you can call it negative recruiting. It's just recruiting. Like it's just that's how you do it, and that's the way to do it. And I'm sure Penn State does it to other prospects as well. But you hear the outside influences on something like that, and I think that's fascinating when you take a look at that and you break it down. And like I said, Oish is not the only situation. We've heard stuff like that. And again, I'm not putting Penn State up on a pedestal here, because I think they do the same thing in terms of comps, in terms of how these work with other programs as well. But it's just an interesting dynamic to the recruiting. And if you're down in the weeds recruiting nerds like we are, like that's a very interesting way to look at it.
Ryan, you had something you wanted to say?
Penn State played 3 tight ends. I mean, Khalil Dinkins had a substantially less snaps than obviously the other 2, but he still played in 12 games last year. I mean, they do rotate tight end a good bit. So I think that kind of also speaks to what Ty's trying to tell him and get through, is that, we're going to rotate 2-3 guys minimum, and that's probably going to stay pretty consistent. Unless if, of course, Luke Reynolds or somebody becomes Mike Gesicki, then things change a little bit there.
But even then, you had Brenton Strange, a 2nd-round pick, and he was I don't want to call him a rotational player, but like they played all 3 of those tight ends. Before that, you've had a run of 2nd-round picks basically at tight end. So like the football aspect of it makes a lot of sense for Penn State.
Yeah. And I also think that I know we've talked about this a little bit. We did a whole show basically on Andy Kotelnicki yesterday, but when it comes to the tight end position, he's been able to leverage them as blockers, but also incorporate them as explosive downfield passers. Even if they don't get 50 targets a year, he has been able to get them big plays. That's kind of what Andy Kotelnicki does, and I understand that like it happens in September through November, and the decisions are being made now. But there is at least that to rely on when you have the conversation of not only do they play 3 tight ends, the new offensive coordinator is willing to play anybody, and he has a track record of doing these things. I think all of that is a positive for Penn State. Again, like you guys said, we'll see what it means, because one thing I've learned is playing time, it doesn't all mean the same thing to everybody. So if you get 75 to 150 snaps in a season, or you're projected to maybe have 400 but not be a starter, that might be what you're looking for, like starter time, or that's it. And Mech Engineer 100 brings up King Mack in this conversation about transfers. Fitz really loved that transition. PSU is poised to have 20 defensive backs on the roster next season. Surely there must be someone who can step up and replace King Mack. We're not going to get into the diminishing of King Mack.
No, we're going to. We're going to.
Oh, okay.
Because this is a message board trait that I can't stand, because we work so hard to get verified measurables. And you saw this a lot with Lamont Wade. Like, okay, everything outside of Lamont Wade. Okay. Somebody's saying he's a 5'7" safety. He's not a 5'7" safety. He measured at pro day at 5'10" plus. King Max is the same way. Kainoa Winston a couple weeks ago, I saw somebody saying he's 5'8". What are we doing, guys? Like,
perspective is important. The people he's standing next to are 6'5".
Yes.
You can be 5'9" and look small amongst giants.
Yes.
I'm just going to say that from experience.
I think he's listed on his profile at 5'10.6. If we're not nothing, if not specific there, but it's funny when you see these guys go elsewhere, or when you see something like that, the diminishing of their height, and look, it doesn't bother me, it might bother you too, but the diminishing of their height is something that you can always fall back on as you see it in the message board. So I just wanted to address that. King Mack was 5'9 3/4. That's pretty close to 5'10". So I just
and the 0.6 was a typo by me, by the way. I did fix that like a week or 2 ago.
But he is.
I noticed it.
But he is 5'10.6. Like that's what he is. So, but no, it's just very funny to see that, and that's not a shot at Mech Engineer. It's just it gets me every time I see it. It's just like, hey, this guy, and to that credit, 20 years ago, like, we did not have these checks and balances. We did not have this system. You could get away with saying a guy was 6'1" on the internet when he was 5'10". Doesn't really happen anymore. There are some overzealous, people in our position that will take anybody's word for it. Like a coach will tell a kid or tell us that he's 6'1" and he's 5'10". Well, we got to get the actual data on that. So You could get away with that at one point. You look back at Penn State's class of like 1995, and it's littered with guys that were 3 inches taller than they actually were. So like, that's kind of how that works. And luckily with the internet, we've got some checks and balances here. So that was fun. I just definitely have been harboring that for years. But I'm good to get it out. It's good. It's a good therapy session.
As somebody who has been through this before, I played 1 season of high school football, and I didn't even play the full season because I got injured. But when I was being officially measured for the roster, I said, shoes on or off? And my coach said, do you play football in cleats? And I said, yes. And he said, you're wearing your cleats when you get measured. So I was 5'11" on the roster. I am not 5'11". It's the only time in my life I've been 5'11". So like lying about this has always been a thing. But to the question here that he asks, is there somebody on the roster who can replace King Mack? We've had this conversation a couple of times. It was more of a statement, but we'll just raise the question here quickly. I think, based on what we saw from him and just generally his profile, that I think he's a smart football player, and now he's got the size. We saw him flash as a freshman. I've got my eye on Lamont Payne during training camp to see if he can turn that corner. I know you've mentioned Jayon Lane. I talked to KJ Winston, who was super excited to talk about Jayon Lane. So, Ryan, I'll come to you on this one. Is there another name you want to throw in there, or what context do you want to add to maybe some guys you're looking for at that fourth safety spot, or just fourth defensive back? Let's just open it up to the full secondary.
Well, Penn State has a very good 3-man rotation, right? I mean, it's not like it's just Jalen and KJ. Obviously, Zaki's going to play a lot too, and sure, they will work a fourth in there. Yeah. Who's it going to be? I mean, Lamont had some. There are certainly some things that Lamont had some good reviews, and talking to different people. Is Akari Nelson ready, Sean? I mean, you would kind of know that stuff a little bit better than me, Sean. You kind of pay attention to the team stuff more than me, but like, I don't know how important, like, in the grand scheme of like Penn State, getting to the playoff or whatever. Like, to me, there's a lot more other things that are going to dictate that over who's going to be able to step up for King Mack's role next year. As long as those guys stay healthy, of course, then you got some different questions.
T. Frank, write this down for a show title. Is Penn State's fourth safety a cornerback? I think that's where we go with that. And I think the way that this defense is played, I think that's where I'm leaning right now. There's hope for Jayon Lane, but like I've said before, he just got here, and that's the if you're looking at the line graph, that's a high point on the hope. Like, because you look at him, T. Frank, I know you looked at him with those adoring eyes the other day, and he was like standing out beside Nittany Lions, which is not easy to do for a safety. But at the same time, there's so much they're going to throw at him in the next couple of weeks, months, leading up to preseason camp. You can't realistically sit there and say that a true freshman is going to be able to be a fourth safety in the sense of Penn State plays 4 safeties, and that's too deep. So you've got him, you've got Vabu Torre, Nelson and Payne. I think a name to throw out here, just since it's being fun, and we kind of talked about corner in there. Colin Dinkins is going to get on the field this year.
Yes,
Colin Dinkins is a guy that can make things happen in terms of playing that lion position, and he's fast. Like, he's not. I don't think he's like outside corner like 4.3 fast, but like he can run.
Yeah. He's also 202 now, so he's put on the weight to play underneath coverage.
I think that's a position that is meant for him if that's his path to the field. Now his path to the field is special teams. He played in all 13 games last year, but his path to the field as a awesome walk-on story and a guy they love in the program. Ryan, I think he's hosted somebody every weekend. Is that right? Like like in terms of like what you're trying to sell. Like, Colin Dinkins is an awesome story, and I talked to Terry Smith about it the other day, and maybe he factors in that spot, and I hope he does. I love those stories.
This year's Dom DeLuca, like, maybe.
Yeah, King Mack played 70 snaps last year. 40 of which came against UMass and Delaware. So it's not like they were rotating him a ton. I think he played pretty well against Illinois. I think it was. If I remember one other game. I thought Illinois was maybe a kind of game where you saw 20 or so snaps and he played decently, but. It's not like he was, a 20 guy.
Well, he was the 5th guy that was making. Keaton was still here, so like,
right?
There's kind of a line there, but
he's also the guy that I think was ready to do more this offseason because he, going back to the point, if he's not 5'10", well, whether he's 5'10" or not, he played bigger than he was because he hit, he ran, he could tackle, he could cover. You'd love to have Dakari Nelson be in this conversation. They came in at the same time. in the same class anyway. And Dakari has the size and the athleticism to be an impact player, but who's ready to take on the challenge of understanding the defense and being in position and playing fast and not being in your own head? And the way we read the situation, at least the way I read the situation, some of the context clues I've picked up, that's not in the cards for him yet. So it becomes, who's the guy that if you had to put in a situation that has those abilities, I think all of us are comfortable saying, and Fitz, you, just to put a button on this, is probably going to be a corner. It's going to be somebody that isn't a safety, and they can always move Jalen Reed back to that field safety and have another linebacker or corner, somebody playing that slot position. Back to official visit weekend. Are there any other conversations? Fitz and I talked about Taz Williams earlier this week. Ryan, do you have anything you want to add on some of the other players? We covered Jahmir Joseph that were here this last weekend, so we got Randy Adarica, Taz Williams. Anything there that you find interesting among the players that were here last weekend?
Randy's quiet. I think a lot of people expect him to stay at Miami. Time will tell. I think Penn State certainly is in the mix, but he's not a guy that I can sit here and pretend I have an awesome feel for, because he's just been quiet throughout. I think, he's only done a handful of interviews really throughout his entire recruitment. So I think the safe bet feels like Miami. That's what a lot of people believe, but I don't know if anybody really has a good inside, foot inside the door, I guess is the best way to put it with Adarica. With Taz Williams, man, like, he was another guy where Michigan was a lot of talk, but like recently I kind of get the impression that, like, if Texas A&M wants to take him, that Texas A&M can get him. It's just where he's at exactly on their board. That's kind of the feedback I've gotten as far as what people are trying to get a better feel for. So he's another guy that, Penn State certainly had a good visit with and all that, but I just feel like they're not the leader. They're second, third, somewhere in that ballpark. Can they get over that hump? After official visit to Michigan this weekend, it feels unlikely, I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, and Michigan does not have a wide receiver commit in that 2025 class. So like they're kind of in a similar situation to Penn State in terms of the opportunity that he has, whereas Texas A&M I think is a little bit more advanced, and they've got, of course, a bevy of really good receivers around them in Texas.
So last thing on the receiver conversation, I apologize. I meant to put this in the rundown, but I ran out of time today. Penn State is in a holding pattern with some of the guys that we think, and you guys have gone on the record saying that you think they're going to be Nittany Lions. I believe Lex Cyrus and Jeff Exeter both have decision dates or decision times in mind. So those pendings on the commitment conversation, Ryan, could you give those to the fans right now so they know the timeline of when those things might happen, and then how that impacts the class?
I think Exeter should be next week. He's consistently said he wants to get it done as soon as he's done with his OVs. He'll be at Maryland this weekend. I wouldn't be shocked at all by this time next week. We know where Jeff Exeter's at. Lex, I thought, could potentially make a move by now. He took an official visit to South Carolina the week after Penn State. That was now basically 2 weeks ago. Lex has always kind of kept to himself. I think almost every interview I've done is like going actually out to Susquehanna to talk to him. So he's not one to really open up too much about that stuff. So I wouldn't. Lex is just, there's no real date or anything like that with Lex. I wouldn't be shocked at all if on Saturday I'm scrambling to get that up. I wouldn't be shocked at all if it drags out into the beginning of July either. It's kind of hard to figure out with Lex, but I will say, like, Penn State seems to be pretty aggressive with Lex as far as everything they're offering and trying to keep him in state. So I still feel good that they should be able to get those two. It just Lex is gonna kind of do his own thing, and when he decides, he decides.
I'm going to dip into the chat here for just 1 second, and at risk of poking the bear, this was too humorous for me not to address. Sharice Armstead, we have a resident troll in the chat. I don't know who she's a fan of, some other team in the Big Ten. Okay, she says, I'm sorry, but I don't believe in the James Franklin hype. Lady, do you know where you are? Have you, clearly you have not been in the comment section of any Penn State content. The people here, other than Franklin Fanatic, who is not here today, I understand when you're trolling people, you're going to throw literally anything at the wall and see what sticks and hits a nerve. I think you're going to find more people agreeing with you here in the comment section than anywhere else, including your own shows and message boards if you are a contributor to those. Now let's move on, because it is the final weekend for Penn State and the rest of college football to host official visitors. Get these over the line. Important players coming to campus this coming weekend. So we're going to start the bidding with the top player, and a player at a position that I think Penn State still would like to land one of its top two, Jayon Blair. Fitz, we talked a little bit about him, but introduce people to Jayon Blair who don't know about him.
Yeah, Jayon Blair is, hey, I talked big safeties. This kid's nearly 6'5". Like, he is an interesting projection because he moves extremely well at that size. It's one that, hey, is he going to play safety for 4 years in college? I don't know. But at the same time, Penn State's going to give him a shot to do so. Notre Dame's going to give him a shot to do so. Notre Dame, of course, is pitching that Kyle Hamilton tall safety pitch that they have had success with, obviously. But no, this is one of the top targets for a long time. I know Ryan and I kind of had some internal dialogue in terms of, I went with Winston, he went with Blair. You're in a 1A, 1B situation, I thought there. So I think that he's a big time target. If you're taking a look at this weekend, sort of wholesale of what's coming up, I think he's the top target, top priority. And I'm not sure it's particularly close. I know there's some guys that could end up in Penn State's class coming this weekend, but like in terms of guys that they've targeted from the start, and Blair has reciprocated that interest. He's been up a bunch. He camped last year. Like, he's been to some of the big landmark recruiting events that Penn State holds throughout the year. So like, this is a situation where they're trying to close. Notre Dame, of course, is prevalent here in Michigan, and Penn State have been the big three throughout this process. I know he's visited a bunch of schools, but this is a guy that they certainly would love to close on. Certainly not going to be easy.
Ryan, what's your read on the situation? I know this has been one we've been following, as Fitz said, for a while.
I think this is a good situation for Penn State to get him last. I think Penn State strategically, this was one that, really early on, Sean, back like over a month ago, this one was set and as the last one. And I think that was by design by Penn State. Now, with that said, Notre Dame has certainly put themselves in the best position. Michigan's in there. And look, he fits all three of those programs really well. So at the end of the day, I don't know if you guys can hear this kid screaming in the background, but it's really distracting right now. At the end of the day, if Notre Dame is the firm leader and that's still the case, it's going to be hard for me to see Penn State flipping him. At the same time, he fits these three schools so well that, I do feel like Penn State can give him something to really think about. So I haven't written him off yet, but I also believe that at the end of the day, Broswell Thomas, Antonio Branch will probably be the two safeties in this class.
He's interesting, 6'4", and just seeing him on film. There was a 5-star that went to Miami. For a hot second before I was full-time here, I was also moonlighting as a Miami correspondent for our website down there. So I got a chance to see James Williams, or Jameson Williams, I forget. 5-star safety from American Heritage, who went undrafted because they played him at safety, and he's obviously a Sam linebacker. And I'm not saying that's Jayon Blair, but I'm saying in Penn State's defense, you have the ability to be that hybrid and that Kyle Hamilton that can play all over the field. You can do all of those things. So I think there's a strong recruiting pitch for him in that particular mold. But if he's leaning Notre Dame, he's leaning Notre Dame, and it doesn't matter how much you pitch all of these things. Just interesting from a perception standpoint and from a like to like standpoint, the different variances there are.
My Miami correspondent, how did James Williams' career overlap with Manny? I'm curious because I just looked
think Manny recruited him.
I know Manny recruited him, but I wasn't sure if he ever actually played in Manny's defense. Because I know if you talk to Miami fans, James Williams is one of those guys that, we talk about Theo Johnson not being used properly. James Williams is that on steroids with Miami fans, because they thought the world of him talent wise. It was very interesting to watch that career play out and watch a situation where he was not used to his abilities.
He was a freshman with Manny Diaz. I remember watching him during the film of Manny Diaz to get to know who he was, and then Mario Cristobal took over after that, and then everything kind of became cookie cutter, and how they deploy their safety. So he didn't really get an opportunity to do the Manny Diaz stuff because he probably was in a specific role as a freshman trying to learn a very hard position.
Started 7 games as a true freshman. The kid had ridiculous. I remember him from All-American games and stuff. He had ridiculous talent.
Yeah. Another guy interesting situation here. Jahmir Whallace-Coleman is coming to campus. Ryan, 3 running backs in the class, having 1 visit. How do you view this particular situation with the Imhotep running back?
Well, it's out of 4th. Screw it. No, but who knows? I mean, I think Alvin Henderson, we know his schools are still going to keep going after him. Like, this is a difficult spot for Penn State to kind of be in a couple ways, because I do feel like it's Imhotep. They're high enough on him. There's a lot there that they like. And if he really, really was serious about committing, I do think that they would have a real hard discussion about that, because I do think he might be a little higher on their board, maybe compared to some guys who are already committed. But at the same time, Jahmir's never been very active with recruiting and different things like that. So maybe he takes his time with this one. And in some ways that could be beneficial to Penn State, so they can figure some things out. But he's certainly high enough on their board, which, at times we weren't exactly sure where he sat at. But now I feel pretty confident he is a guy they really like, that they would have to have a serious discussion if he was serious about it. We know I think he just went to North Carolina recently. Other than that, it's been really hard to try to track down information on where exactly he's gone. There's been a lot of quiet guys this year, man. I feel like I say that all the time on this podcast, and I hate saying that, but
yeah,
man, this year's been just tough to track some guys down and really get key information on.
A lot of quiet guys and not a lot of info on some of these, maybe even from the outer region. Fitz, looking at his film here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, if you want to check those out, we have the highlights of all of these players here that we show you, so you can get a sense of who they are. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyke Hayes. Is there a lot of overlap, or is he good enough prospect that what Ryan is saying is he's a take? They have to have a serious conversation about that.
Well, they're going to have serious conversations, just because you've got 3 running backs, 2 of them are out of region, and you feel pretty decent about those guys coming out of your official visit weekend. I think a lot of the chatter on Alvin Henderson has been more external than internal, although I'm not taking my eye off that one. Like, I mean, he's an Alabama kid that Auburn wants. Miami might get him on campus. That, I'm not saying that he's solid or anything like that, but that's one you keep an eye on. Keandre Barker seems to have come around a little bit more, although I have his tweets on notification, and I guess a teammate or a friend got an Arkansas offer this morning and just got it on my watch, and it just kind of freaked me out for a second. But everything seemed okay. It seems okay with Tyke Hayes. I know he went out to California a couple of weeks ago, but it seems like things are good there. And also, I'm going to push for Tyke Hayes, man. I think he might be the best of the 3. Like, yeah. He's a guy that's got a really well-rounded skill set. And it's funny. I was having this conversation with somebody earlier this week. If you look at his profile and you see his profile picture, he looks like a big kid. Like, he looks like a big 12-year-old. And if you see him now, like, there were people at Penn State this weekend didn't recognize him. Like, he's a different kid in terms of physical makeup and all terms of all that stuff. I think he's trending up, and I think he's a good player. Like, I think we talked about this when he committed. Is like, hey, does he have a spot? I think he's very firmly like on their list right now.
Ryan, I'm going to come to you for this one again. We're going down to Miami Central, and a teammate of Beckham Kritza, Nan Montgomery, the wide receiver, another wide receiver name entry here. What do you think about this situation coming into the official visit?
Yeah, player Penn State's hosted a couple of times. Don't believe he's been up in 2024, but I think he visited twice last year. I'm not sure if it was the Blue-White game or maybe right before, somewhere in mid-April last year, and then he was up for one of the games last October, I believe. But, I mean, the thing with Montgomery is, like, he's always been a really good route runner. There's a lot of things that Penn State likes to build around, but how fast is he? Well, last week he goes off to one of those camps and, put it publicly, which I don't know. Schools I don't think always really like when players do that, especially when they camp at their specific, school camp. But anyway, he put it out there that, he ran a 4.3 and a 4.47. Excuse me, a 4.43 and a 4.47.
4.3.
So I mean,
damn.
Both 4.43.
I haven't. Well, it was at LSU, so a 4.4 at LSU is like a 4.7 here. So that's a joke.
But anyway, I mean, so like obviously those numbers look good. No, I get it, but I don't know. I still look at Exner. I still look at Cyrus. I still look at Otten. I still look at a couple other guys, and I feel like they're more realistic. But then at the same time, I see Samari Reed. I see Montgomery. I see a couple others that's like, well, could we get another Dixon situation or even Branch to some degree where you get kind of a guy who surprises. And if there's a position for it, wide receiver makes a ton of sense. I mean, there's another wide receiver. There's 2 more wide receivers coming up this weekend too, who from the outside looking in, pretty quiet. There's not a lot of internal discussion or people we speak with don't really always mention them all the time, but Darius Dixon wasn't the guy they were mentioning all the time either, and look what happened there. So Montgomery, Kobe Howard, Samari Reed, all three of those guys are coming up from South Florida this weekend, and it wouldn't shock me if somebody made a move there. But who exactly is hard to say.
Fitz, we've talked about this. Ryan put up his list of 5 favorite wide receivers on the message board recently. We had a whole show about it. None of us had Nayshawn Montgomery on there, but the speed, if that's been answered, really good route runner, as you guys said. Does he fit in the class? Is that a guy that I hate to say this, like, where's the line of these are the good receivers, and then we missed it enough that we've got to go down a tier? And where do you think Montgomery is in that conversation?
I hate to say it, but I'm going to throw the red meat out there, is what you're saying to me. It was interesting to me. So here's the plan. Though he's going to go to LSU over the weekend. He was going to camp and then take an official visit. Even with that 4.43, he ended up not taking the official visit for LSU. That's like, in my mind, that's okay. So no, that's number one. Number two, you've got Beckham Kritza, who's teammate at Miami Central, has been banging the drum for this kid. It almost seems like a situation where they're recruiting Penn State. And what I mean by that, and we hear this, Ryan hears this all the time, is like there's a guy that's on the edge or on the line or whatever, and like it's trying to convince a school that they're it. Like, so I think we got a situation like that with Nayshawn Montgomery. There's a lot of receivers on the board. That's by design. Everybody they heard your criticisms, and they spread the net pretty wide this cycle. So there was like 10 or 11 official visitors. Again, I tend to go with the guys that are closer to home. I think that's a logic play, and I think that's a familiarity play. Cyrus, Exenor, Otten, those are my big three right now. But you're bringing in Samari Reed. He's been on campus a couple of times. And there's some guys in that building that really like Samari Reed. Kobe Howard kind of popped up a couple of weeks ago. Ryan reported that. I saw he put a tweet out there yesterday to make it public, but Ryan reported that a couple of weeks ago. So, like, hey, cover your bases, man. Do what you got to do. This is a situation where, yes, you could pocket a couple of official visits, but might as well use what you've got.
Ryan, we're going to move on. In case you look like you might have had something to say, but we got to get to all of these official visitors. I don't want to go too long. Max Buchanan.
I guess I'll just say my family really wants to go to the beach. That's what I need to say. Go ahead.
Yes. So we got about 8 minutes. We're going to get through 6 more prospects, excuse me. So Fitz, we're going to Max Buchanan. What do you know about this situation along the offensive line? A guy we have not talked about when we've talked about Penn State's prospects on the offensive line a whole lot.
Yeah, first off, Ryan, you should just tell your wife to calm down. I don't know why that's not an issue.
Oh, it's not my wife. It's my 4-year-old. But go
okay. Max Buchanan actually has grown into an important target. Penn State does not have a ton of offensive linemen on that board, and he is an interior guy. He's a guard center type prospect, but this is a guy that Penn State's been targeting for a long time. I mean, this was reported probably back in the spring that they wanted to get him up for a visit, but he's got schools in Florida that want him. I still think UCF is sneaky here with Max Buchanan. It's right down the road. But Florida State has been going after him. There's been some really good schools on Max Buchanan. He's got a very good relationship with Phil Troutwine, and they'll try to continue that. He came up for a game when he was really young. So I think Penn State outside looking in right now, but I also think it's a situation where he has not tied himself to anyone. Like Clemson, you thought might have been the leader at one point, but that doesn't seem like the case right now. If you look at his RPM on his on-3 profile, Florida State's at 22, UCF's at 17, Miami's at 12, Clemson's at 10. Oh, okay. I don't do percentages. I don't know what that means. But at the same time, that's all lumped together. There's not an overwhelming leader. Distance plays into it. Visits play into it. It's a mathematical formula. We're not math guys here. But the kid has put a lot of effort into visiting schools. He's put a lot of effort into researching schools. And Penn State's going to get the last shot of him in June. So a sneaky big one this weekend with Max Buchanan.
So let's move on to Ryan's favorite position. That's the defensive line, where it's kind of a giant question mark about the board. So Cortez Harris, throw him in the mix here, Ryan. What do we know about Cortez Harris? What do you know about this recruitment?
Yeah, good one. I would say this. Like, I think Cortez Harris is coming off an injury, and when we pull up the data and information we get from Under Armour, some of the athletic numbers I think have left Penn State with questions. Now, at the same time, there's a lot to like as far as frame, build, all those things. Right. And so, like, to me right now, there's certainly guys higher on the board, I think, than Cortez Harris, but they're bringing him in for a reason, right? This is a position where they need to get things going. They lost out on Jaden Lofton. They're waiting to hear back from a bunch of guys. I would have, honestly, if they would have got a couple guys already on board, I'm not sure how much this visit would have happened. But again, like, there's also a lot of traits and different things that I do like about Harris. So I think a lot of it just comes back to, like, how he's going to get off of this injury he had. Can he get back to some of the numbers or some of the potential, I think, that people thought before he had that. But time kind of isn't on his side with that one either, because, obviously school's going to start filling up here pretty quickly. But really good kid. I like Cortez a lot. There's a lot of questions still, though, about, like, how athletic he is, especially for a guy his size, too, because, he's going to need some time in the weight room.
Fitz, pro tip to all of the recruits out there: wear the arm sleeves because they make your arms look longer. Cortez Harris looks like he's got gigantic vines for arms. That might be true. That might not be true. It certainly looks like it, and I would imagine if Penn State's interested, maybe that's the case. Quickly, anything you want to wrap up here with the D-line and Cortez Harris before we move on to the next prospect?
He's got good length, but he's just so small to begin with. He's just over 6'2", 205 maybe. And again, I don't worry about weight, but, like, the frame looks big because he's not very big.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of I don't want to say Shaka, because Shaka was a little bit naturally longer than Harris.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, we're talking about that kind of build, and to be that kind of build in the Big Ten, you have to move like a spider. Like, you have to be that,
and have that first step.
Laterally, have that first step. And I think he has elements of that. This was a guy that was very high on the board for a lot of programs at the outset of his recruitment. And maybe now it's not the same that we thought, when he won that Under Armour defensive line award in 2023. So I don't think he's grown the way that many hoped, to be a 6'4" guy, and you don't need to be a 6'4" guy, but to have length, to have all that kind of stuff. So it's very interesting to me. Again, this is something I'll keep banging the drum for. Jaden Lofton going to Tennessee, that one hurt. Like, that one,
yes.
Like, there was downplaying of that one after he committed to Tennessee, but, like, in talking to people at Penn State, that's one that they thought they could get. And he's 6'4", 235. He's a different build than Harris, but, like, that's one that we probably didn't spend enough time talking on before this official visit season.
So just to clarify, like, Harris has good explosive numbers, just from, like, looking at Under Armour and being down there and watching that camp. But for a guy who's not quite 6'3", like, barely 200 pounds, he ran like a 4.9 and had a 4.7 shuttle that day. So when you're that size, and you got to add a lot of size to play at that level, and you're already barely under 5 seconds for 40, and shuttle's okay. That's the concern there.
So we're going to do a little bit of editing, but I apologize to your 4-year-old. We're going to go a little bit long today. Kobe Howard, guys. Got to mention another wide receiver. This one from down in Florida again, from Chaminade-Madonna, a big school in Florida too. So Fitz, what's the situation? I know this. Who did this? Who was reporting on this the last couple of weeks? Because I know this has been something that we've been watching behind the scenes.
Yeah, I originally reported that. That was in May, I think it was, or maybe even early June, just to keep an eye out on this kid because he was a name that we heard, and then it turned into an official visit maybe midway through the month or something like that. But Jayon Snyder has tremendous relationships at Chaminade-Madonna, which is, one of the top talent producers, and a lot of their guys hit. I know Penn State probably has a sore spot with John Dunmore, but a lot of their guys are end up as quality college players. So keeping an eye on him. It's another one of those situations where, they've got some buzz in South Florida at a certain level of prospect, and Kobe Howard was a guy that you thought might go to Florida, was a guy that you thought might go to Florida State. Maybe I don't know that he has those options right now.
But good speed. I was impressed with what I saw from him here on film in terms of this is a guy who you can put in that lump of receivers that Penn State's recruiting. Ryan, what is your read of the situation here?
Yeah, like you just said, lump him in with a bunch of these guys, man. Samari Reed, I'd have in there, and Montgomery. We didn't even mention Corey Sims earlier. He visited earlier in the month. So there is a core group there behind those top three of Cyrus, Exner, and Otten. And, wouldn't shock me at all if you get a surprise from those guys. But, man, it's so hard to kind of read a lot of the South Florida guys as it is. And then, obviously, when they do commit, then you're always hesitant to be like, how solid is this? Because if he goes out and has a good senior season, some of these SEC schools, Southern schools, are going to come poking around again. So let's see. I mean, I did talk to him last week. He has a relationship with Beckham Kritza, which is interesting. Really, obviously, as Sean said, Jayon Snyder's the big reason this visit's happening. But Higgins has done a decent job, building a relationship as well. So let's see. I mean, it will be his first time visiting, so who knows?
We're over the hour mark before we mention LeVar Arrington II. Of course, we have to mention him as a football player that Penn State is recruiting. We'll put linebacker on here, but I still feel like it's TBD, Ryan. This situation looks like an athlete. Does he have a position that Penn State values him at, and how is this recruitment going, in your opinion?
Certainly seems to be linebacker. I mean, that is pretty consistently mentioned, because we've talked about different ways he could be used as well. But, I expect him. I was talking to somebody this morning, like I think he's hanging out with Kari Jackson this weekend, I believe, is his host. So like it's linebacker, everything that's been mentioned to us. As far as where this is going, like he just visited Tennessee twice in a month, took an unofficial visit there, then came back about 3 weeks later for an official. That always has my attention. Now, Sean, we said the same thing about Jaden Lofton, right? And then he ends up at Tennessee, which is ironic. But so that's interesting. I think UCLA's been in the mix for a long time as well. What's intriguing about this one to me is just like LeVar's connections to the program still. We talk about Michael Carroll and some of these other guys who have legacy ties, but their families aren't nearly as close or connected or as active, I guess maybe as I should say, with the current staff as somebody like LeVar Arrington is. So that's always interesting to me, just because of, I mean, LeVar is name 3 or 4 alumni or lettermen who are trying to at least be as active as he has been over the last year. I'm sure there's some out there, but my point is he's up there. Fitz,
take us home on this one. A guy who earned it this summer, coming to the first Penn State camp, Braz Thomas. He's a DB. I put safety here. I'm not quite sure entirely. Wildly impressive elements of his film here. So what do you think about the situation here with him as a Penn State prospect coming into the final official visit weekend?
Yeah, certainly worked his way into it. We talk about that Peter Gonzalez path where you come to camp and you basically earn that offer back. You've got that check mark. That check mark means varying things throughout the cycle. But Braswell Thomas came in and he ran extremely well and he tested extremely well. He went through position drills really well. And this is a guy that certainly moved up their board in the last 30 days. There was a guy that has had there was academic questions, but I think a lot of those have been if not answered, like taken care of and figured out why the situation was like it was. I mean, I haven't sat down and done a deep dive in terms of like his film, but he, as you can see on the YouTube, can play corner, has played wide receiver. I think he's still listed as a wide receiver on 3.
Yes.
But he's a safety all the way. Like he's a guy that checked in with that big safety size, and he should be good to go in terms of like fitting into that room athletically and as a physical presence, I guess.
Ryan, I just watching here on film, the vertical ability he's got, he hangs in the air. I imagine his explosive numbers were part of that really impressive testing all the way back at the beginning of June. You said he's going to be one of the safeties in this class. I guess what makes you think that coming here into Friday, starting next week with the official visit?
Well, look, if Jayon Blair commits quickly, right? I mean, we'll see. Maybe that would change things, but I just feel like most realistically, or he is the most realistic right now. Just look at history, man. Like when a guy comes and camps at Penn State, and it's the only camp he does all summer, right? Like, I mean, it says something. It says he wants that offer. He wants to be able to join that class. And, when Penn State then sets up an official visit, almost immediately, it says that, both ways are on the same wavelength, I guess.
Tough to ignore.
Yeah. So I just think that the history says that this one is going to probably get over the line.
So we'll be monitoring all of that as we get out of official visit weekend and into the dead period, which begins commitment season. It's already started, but when you've got all of your official visits done, players are making their decisions. And we will have that for you here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Subscribe, like, review, rate, leave us a note. Pass letters and flowers in class, whatever it is you want to do. We're going to be here for you as we go through the recruiting season, except for the week where I'm on the West Coast. So we'll see how all of that plays out coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm Thomas Reincar, Ryan Snyder, Sean Fitz, our insiders in Penn State recruiting, doing a great job today. Thank you for all you've done. We will be back with more here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel.